Hi all. Today I have a study for you that suggests atheists are at risk of dying out due to contraception. A number of news sources have latched onto this story, as well as some religious sites like the Christian Post, and I think it's worth looking into. I'm going to be reading from The Independent. Atheists at risk of dying out due to belief in contraception, study claims. Ooh, scary. Alright, so a new study has suggested that atheism is doomed because religious people have higher rates of reproduction. Right away my bullshit meter has gone into high alert. They're talking about atheism like it's a genetic component. Many, in fact I'd hazard a guess that most, atheists have come from a religious background. Their atheism wasn't passed down to them by birth, but is a position they've come to adopt because they've considered the evidence and actually thought about why they believe in a particular deity. I've also yet to read a study that conclusively shows there is some sort of God gene, although I suppose you can argue that having a superstitious nature might be beneficial to survival in some instances, especially if you're fighting for survival in the wilderness, and that's why our species seems so prone to it. But I digress, let's carry on with the article. Due to their lack of belief in contraception, religious believers are having more children than atheists, which could ultimately result in the end of atheism, the study suggests. Very strange choice of words here. I very much doubt that most religious people lack belief in contraception. They do believe contraception exists, although they might decide not to use it because of their religious beliefs. The findings fly in the face of popular discourse and scientists' predictions, which implies fewer and fewer people are religious nowadays. Well, that depends where you go. In the richer nations, religion is losing its stranglehold over the population. As the article admits, studies have shown this. Many people who call themselves Christians, for example, in Western countries, often do so because they feel as if they're culturally Christian, although they don't actively go to church or practice their religion. The word atheist is still not a word many people want to associate with. Many people, who are, for all intents and purposes, atheists because they don't believe in God, identify as agnostics because of the stigma still associated with the word atheist. But no matter how you look at it, religion across the West is in decline. But the new research claims religion is actually at no risk of dying out, and the reverse is in fact the case. Honestly, I don't know too many atheists that believe religion is at risk of dying out completely, especially when you take into account non-Western countries. There's no doubt that there are still a lot of religious people in the world. Scientists from the US and Malaysia studied over 4,000 students, asking them about their religious beliefs and how many siblings they had. They found that Malaysia atheists had 1.5 fewer siblings than the average. Okay, so I'm not sure why they think students are representative of the entire population. I'm no scientist, but wouldn't it be better to survey people from all different walks of life in order to build a picture of what's going on in society? The gap was narrower in the US, where students unaffiliated with any religion had 0.16 fewer siblings than average. Non-religious couples had 3.04 children, whereas the average for the whole population is 3.2. Imagine that. You're asking students from a wealthier, more prosperous country, and lo and behold, you find that the gap between non-religious and religious people having children becomes narrower. Do you think that might have something to do with poverty or the lack thereof? Or is this difference solely because these people happen to be religious or non-religious? It is ironical that effective birth control methods were developed primarily by secularists, and that these methods are serving to slowly diminish the proportional representation of secularists in forthcoming generations, the researchers said. Yeah, they don't sound biased at all. Maybe I'm not being very charitable, but it sounds to me like they're happy to see this result, and this quote was a form of gloating. Stupid secularists. They wanted birth control and now they're going to die out. Idiots. Although one might argue that just because someone has religious parents, it doesn't necessarily mean they will grow up with the same beliefs. Yeah, obviously. Further studies have shown that religion does in fact appear to be heritable. You mean learned, right? It's taught by the parents and the community to the children. That doesn't mean they won't become atheists later in life. I also noticed that the article doesn't link to any study that does prove it's heritable. And it appears both nature and nurture play a role. It may seem obvious that how you're brought up will influence your worldview, but it turns out there's a genetic base too. Of course, how you're brought up will influence your worldview. Who doubts this? Why do you think religious institutions are so hell-bent on getting to people when they're children? You've also yet to provide evidence for your claim that religion is heritable or genetically based. I've heard of the God gene hypothesis that claims some people are more predisposed to superstition or mystical experiences, but it's not a scientifically accepted theory. It's an hypothesis, and yet this article seems to be claiming it is a fact. Those with higher capacity to believe in God have certain genes. Well, you go ahead and prove that. The researchers of the study explained that before the 19th century, there was probably little difference in reproduction rates regardless of whether you had the genes or not. However, this then changed. By the mid-19th century, scientific discoveries had moved to a point that human reproduction was sufficiently well understood that fertility rates began to be impacted, especially in the emerging industrial countries, the scientists explained. Imagine that. Again, it seems the industrialization of a country might play a factor in how many children people have, and not just how religious the people might be that inhabit that country. And just as the discovery discovery of evolution was made, the genes that make someone more likely to be religious gained a reproductive advantage and were better able to spread through the population, the Times reported. Honestly, what are you talking about? Let me see if I'm understanding you correctly. The discovery of evolution gave people who had this hypothetical gene an advantage? How? Why? Why would the discovery of evolution do any of those things? This was a time when effective and safe means of birth control were yet to be developed. However, research indicates that the individuals who were most successful in curtailing their fertility during this time were the most highly educated and least religious, the researchers explained. And likely the wealthiest as well, right? I mean, if they're the most highly educated in their society, they're also likely to be the wealthiest, which might play a role in whether or not they choose to have children. Yet it seems that you've jumped to the conclusion that this has everything to do with religiosity and very little, if anything, to do with other factors, such as education, wealth, standards of living, and so forth. For example, you have this. Casual observation of data on fertility rates would suggest that having children is an inferior good. Across countries, there is a strong negative correlation between GDP and fertility, and within countries, there is a strong negative correlation between household income and fertility. That is, richer countries have lower fertility rates than poor ones, and high-income families in a given country have fewer kids than low-income families do. Now, I'm not saying religion or the lack of religion doesn't play some role in fertility rates, but this paper and article do a horrendous job of demonstrating a positive link between the two, in my opinion. Atheism isn't genetic, and whether or not atheists breed at the same rate as religious people has nothing to do with atheism dying out. As long as there is religion and people who think critically about why they believe certain ideas, like religion, you will have atheists. Anyhow, that's all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and please leave your thoughts below. Take care and cheers!